Hello and welcome to Leader Talk, where we get two legends, one from the world of cricket, the other from corporate India, and try and draw leadership lessons from their life story. Joining us today in this episode of Leader Talk, two fascinating personalities from the world of cricket, one of the most successful captains that Australia's ever produced, and then a very successful commentator for the last 30 years plus, one of the finest minds that cricket has seen, Chhappel. And from the infrastructure space, he's not just the chairman and managing director of his company, Hindustan construction company, but he's also the heart and soul of it. He's also one of the most outspoken leaders in the world of the infrastructure space here in India. Ajit, Gulabchand, welcome to Leader Talk. So let me start with you, Ian. Was captaincy something that you always aspired to, or is that something that came because of circumstance? Take us back to the story of how you became captain of Australia.
It was circumstance, really. I didn't have any great ambition to captain Australia. I knew a lot about Australian cricket because my father was quite a good cricketer. He always used to take me to the Adelaide Oval to watch cricket, so I was very well versed in the game of cricket. But I hadn't even thought about playing for South Australia, never mind Australia. And we used to have this schoolboys competition. In my last year of playing in that, I was captain of my club, Glenelg, and at the end of the thing they picked two squads of players. We practiced together, and after one of the practices, Jeff Noblet, who was a former test cricketer, took us all up into the dressing room on the main Adelaide Oval, and we went inside. He showed us around, and when we came out of the dressing room, we stood at the top of the stairs looking down out onto the oval, and he said, I want you to all stand here, look at the oval, and he said, I want you, when you get back home, to write down your ambition. Now, I can't remember whether he said just your ambition overall or whether it was in cricket. And for some strange reason or other, I wrote Captain Australia. And I put this piece of paper in my wallet.
You were what, 15, 16? How old were you?
Yeah, I would have been 16 at that stage.
Okay.
Yeah. As I say, why I did it, I don't know. I can't explain it to this day. But it stayed in my wallet until after I'd retired, and one day I was just going through my wallet, I found it there and I threw it out. And I mean, another strange thing happened to me on the 1968 tour of England, which was my first tour of England. And we were in the bar having a drink. We were playing against Kent down in Canterbury, and the manager, Bob Parrish, cricketers drinking in the bar. There was quite a bit of swearing going on, and I was probably leading the band in that regard.
We know about that.
And Bob Parrish turned to me and he said, Ian, if you don't watch your swearing, you won't captain Australia. And I sort of looked at him and I said, Bob, I got no intention of captaining Australia, so I'm not worried about my language. And I don't know whether people assumed because my grandfather was captain of Australia that I was going to captain Australia. But they seem to know more about it than me.
Mr. Gulabchand, he said he's again a captain by circumstance, or he became a captain by circumstance, which is true in your case as well. I mean, I'm told that you had to get into the family business at 18 because your father passed away, and you were told by an elder brother who was 25 years older to you to get into the business. I mean, you were 8th born in your family, so it's a bit like asking the number 8 batsman to start opening the innings.
Well, that's a bit of an exaggeration that I got into business at 18. It took me 4 more years to finish my college.
Okay.
But I didn't do post-graduation, but I got into business. And I think, 8th born has its advantages. One of them, I was very grateful that my father remembered my name. So, on the other hand, it makes you strive a little harder, that you are in the scheme of things, in the food chain, a little lower down. So if you want to get somewhere, then you need to do a little better than to be heard, leave alone to do something actually. And somewhere at the back of your mind, my mother had. My mother was an excellent doctor. She was the first woman from India to become the fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh.
Wow.
And she was practicing in Vienna when she came back when Hitler attacked Vienna. And so that's how she always came with an idea of the idea of Purushartha, where you become the best.
Yeah.
Now, though this was not something that you constantly played on,
and you don't understand when you're new.
Yeah, it stayed with you. That there's something that if you're going to do it well.
In all your experience as a player and as an observer of the game, is it possible to pick leadership material?
I once read a great quote where it said, "A good captaincy is like pornography. It's very hard to define, but you know it when you see it." I think you can judge good captains, and I find I judge captains differently to, say, even other cricketers. A lot of people, they ask you about a certain captain and I say, no, I don't think he's that good. And somebody else, and I'll say, yes, I think he's very good. And they look at you strangely and they say, but bloke A, he's got a very good record, and bloke B that you've said is a good captain hasn't got such a good record. I said, yeah, but I don't judge captains on their record. I judge them. For instance, I thought Arjuna Ranatunga was a very, very good captain. Yeah. And not just because he won the World Cup. I saw him in Test cricket where he was totally outgunned by an Australian side, but he kept Sri Lanka competitive for about 3.5 days. Whereas another captain, Sri Lanka would have been out of the game very early. So you judge them differently. But as for actually picking someone who you think might be a good captain, that's not an easy thing to do, and I don't think there's any great science to that. You can get people who are attacking players, and you then assume that they would be an attacking captain, but they're not. An example, Ricky Ponting, the disappointment with me in Ricky Ponting's captaincy was his nickname is Punter, but he didn't take his gambling instincts onto the cricket field with him. And I think he'd have been a much better captain if he had have done that. Richie Benaud was a great captain of Australia. He took his gambling instincts onto the field with him. The one thing I would say that you don't do is you don't appoint someone a captain who you think is going to be weighed down by the responsibility. You try and look for guys who are going to be buoyed by the responsibility.
Mr. Gulabchand, you obviously, you run a behemoth of a company. You delegate different verticals to different people. Is there any trait or characteristic that you identify early on in a person, in the human resource pool that you have, to say, okay, this person can maybe one day go on to head a vertical?
Now, when you're looking at choosing people, it's a very difficult job because this is one thing you can always get wrong. So the important here is, first is to look for integrity in the man. If there is no character and integrity of character, then you obviously have the wrong man. Thereafter, it's a function of what is the assignment you wish to give him. If you are giving him when I say assignment, which is different from a job description, it's like in cricket parlors, you're now going out to bat on a wet wicket where it's rained very heavily and you got a 500 total to chase. The assignment is very different from opening to bat on a sunny wicket. So the assignment that you're granting a man, and then you see whether he has the talent to do that. But basically, people without character don't do the job.
Can you be a good captain but a bad leader? And vice versa, can you be a good leader but a bad captain?
Yeah, I've always said there are two parts to captaincy. There's the captaincy, which is on the field, and then there's the leadership, which is off the field. Now, the captaincy, if you've got a reasonable knowledge of the game of cricket and you've had a bit of experience, captaincy is not a difficult thing to do. Picking when to change bowlers, where to move the field, those sort of things with cricket knowledge, not that difficult. To me, the hard part is, and this is where you reap your rewards, I said this and I said it before day-night cricket had come into being. I said it's not an 11 to 6 job being a captain. And the hours that you spend with the players after play had finished, you might spend a lot of time with them, but you reap the rewards on the field for that time spent off the field.
Well, we've heard a lot of stories about your leadership skills. Were you the one who was always the last one to leave the ground or leave the bar?
I've always said I was very lucky because I was a drinker. I enjoyed having a drink, and I always thought that was an advantage. I made a huge mistake. My first tour as captain was England in 1972. And I wasn't a great one for speeches. I mean, if speaking was important in captaincy, then Winston Churchill would have been England's best captain. But I thought I'd better sort of say something at the start of the tour and just set out a few of the ground rules. Said a few things, and right at the end I said, what I don't want is, I don't want 4 guys over in that corner of the room and 4 in that corner and 4 in this corner whispering to each other. I said, if you've got a problem, you come to me. And I said, my door is always open. And I looked down right in front of me, and there's Doug Walters smoking on one of his cigarettes, and this grin comes on his face, and I thought, Ian, that's the dumbest thing you've ever said. And I said, I'll change that. My door is open till 3 o'clock, and then I'd like to get some sleep. And the number of times at 5 to 3 I would get the knock on the door, and it would be Walters.
Okay. You know, I don't know if there's a corporate equivalent to that story, whether there's downtime in the corporate world, but some would say there are no more 9-to-5 jobs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break. When I come back, I'll ask Mr. Gulabchand about what do you do in the downtime in the corporate world, because that's an essential aspect of leadership. Can you pick a leader from the way he interacts with his people, not just while he's in office, but outside of it as well? More on leadership coming up in just a moment. This is Leader Talk. Welcome back to Leader Talk. We're in conversation with Ian Chhappel and Ajit Gulabchand. Before the break, Ian was narrating this tale of downtime in cricket and how you need to spend time with the boys post the 9-to-5 job that you have to do. Is there a corporate equivalent to that? I mean, there are no longer 9-to-5 jobs in the corporate world either.
When you talk about downtime, one of the important features of heading a large organization is that you don't become friends with everybody. Because then that can be quite a downer in terms of taking decisions, creating trouble where people feel or perceive you to be biased. So what you need is to be able to lead by some examples, and lead also with a vision that is very clear, and the roadmap that this is where we are going and this is where we want to go. Now obviously the journey is not easy. And most of it is over a longer period, so you do get into troubled waters, and, you know. But foul weather, bad weather, is always known to create leaders, and that's one of the world's biggest leaders has been Winston Churchill, and his bad weather that created Winston Churchill. And look what an extraordinary leader he came to be. Now it's very important that you are always there for the people, not friendly, but you're there. They know that you are very clear, that you don't play games, and that this is something that you're continuously telling them.
Okay. Tell me a little bit, since you brought up the adversity aspect. I mean, they say adversity brings out either the best or the worst in a leader. Correct me if I'm wrong, but would the period from, say, late 2010 till about 2013-14, as a company and as the leader of HCC, was that the toughest phase for you, whether it's a stop work notice from the Environment Ministry, whether it is having to eventually, you know, go on for a corporate debt restructuring program? What is it that phase taught you about you as a leader?
Well, here again I'd like to quote Churchill. If the going is hell, just keep going. You know, you've got to understand that we were really hit between the eyes by what we considered was an extremely wrongful order. Any other country, there would be damages to pay for this. And hopefully one day in ours there will be too. But we were hit very badly. We were all set to go for an IPO, to raise money, to build India's first private city, and the first one since we built Chandigarh. However, that was not to be, and it hit us. But one thing was very sure, that we were very clear that we were doing the right thing. We were about building the city. We were going about it in the cleanest and the safest, good possible manner. We followed all the practices that are required for people to understand that we are transparent, open, and doing things. And so none of us actually felt that we were doing something wrong, and therefore were able to put up a serious moral fight on this. You know, that this is a war worth winning.
It's about conviction.
It's about conviction, and a conviction to do that. But that is not all that went wrong. The whole infrastructure industry in India started collapsing, and the parent company as well got into difficulties. So we've been through this. We are now hopefully near the end of the end of the very hard period. But we have learned one thing, that as a team, given the kind of problems we have discovered within each other, the extraordinary talent we have, that if we can beat this, then what kind of better people are we looking for?
Sure, I think that's a fascinating tale. One of the other essential qualities as a cricketer, as a leader, is discipline, right? You want to be as disciplined about your rigors as a cricketer. Tell us the story about. So I said this when you brought it up as well, the swearing bit. When you became commentator, how hard was it to get off this habit? Because I believe you were virtually on the verge of losing your job as a commentator. One instance?
Yeah, when I joined Channel 9 in Australia, David Hill was the producer, and he told me a couple of things. He said, one, always consider that every microphone is live, and he then told me that there were 4 words that you don't say on television. I managed to get 3 of the 4 into one sentence. But
you didn't lose your job?
No, I didn't. Kerry Packer was the boss, and he said the only reason I'm not sacking you is because you didn't do it deliberately. So I got a second chance. Anyhow, I said to her, look, I've got to stop swearing because it's, it's the only thing I can do. Otherwise I'll lose my job. And apparently it was reported, and a reporter said to Gary Sobers, because I'd played with Gary for South Australia for a couple of seasons and then obviously played against him and captained against him quite a bit. And the reporter said, I believe Ian's going to stop swearing. And Gary said, well, there'll be a lot of blanks in his conversation then. But yeah, I mean, discipline is a big part of being a player as well as being a captain.
Sure.
Just picking up on a couple of points there from Ajit, it is, I think, respect. Earning respect is one of the most important things as a leader. And if you've earned their respect, then you can go and drink with the boys. I mean, people said to me, oh, what are you going to do now you're captain? And I said, well, what? I used to drink with Marsh and Walters and all these guys. What do you think I'm now not going to go and drink with them? They'll be looking at me saying, well, who's this guy think he is? Does he think he's bigger than us? But if you've earned their respect, they know when you're one of the boys and they can take the mickey out of you, but they also know when you're the boss and you're giving instructions and they've got to follow those instructions. But you can only do that if you've earned their respect. And the other point I'd pick up on is like and dislike. Like and dislike should not come into selection.
Sure.
It's a matter of, can this guy get me 5 wickets? Can this guy get me 100 runs? If the answer to either of those questions is yes, he's in the team. And then it's your job as a leader to make it work so that if he's got a bit of a quirk in his personality, then you've got to make sure that works as a team.
One of the other things, and I think we'll round it off with this, about the question of legacy, and it applies to both of you. This company is older than you, and it's definitely going to exist even after your time. You came into Walchand Hirachand, legendary firm, Hindustan Aeronautics, Hindustan Shipyard. Do you think about that on a daily basis, that you're probably just holding the baton for your adult life and then you're passing it on to the next generation?
Well, you're not thinking about it consciously all the time, but this is where you come from. Here was a man who created this entire transportation industry of this country. Quite a special man who rose above others to superlative heights. And you have his legacy. And therefore you too have a job to do which goes, at least in a similar way above the ordinary that you inherited. So it is not as if you carried on a firm the way it is, but you took it from a small 100 crore firm to a $2 billion construction company, launching a brand new idea of creating a city. So when you look at the levels to which you can bring this does come to some extent as an inheritance. And I've always maintained that the inheritors of Walchand are not only his direct heirs, but any other person who dares to take on and become a great entrepreneur.
Sure, great. I think it's the same with you. I mean, like you said, your maternal grandfather played cricket for Australia, but it's not just the Chappell family. It's also just Australian cricket. I mean, the very fact that you earn your baggy green, there's so much legacy involved in it.
Well, Bradman once said we're all, as in the players, we're all custodians of the game, and we're only here for a short time. I remember saying to the players when I became captain, we all got into this game, certainly in my case, because I went to the Adelaide Oval and I saw Keith Miller play and I saw Richie Benaud play, and I enjoyed what they were doing, and I guess it implanted something in there that one day I wanted to try and be out on that oval doing that game, playing that game like them. And I said to our guys, I said, that's the reason why we got into this game. So we've got to try and leave this game a strong game, at least a strong game, if not stronger than when we came into it, so that the next generation of kids who come along and watch us have a good game to play. And if we've inspired them to go and play that, then that's what that was part of our job.
All right, I think you certainly have inspired not just another generation of Australian cricketers, but cricketers around the world. Thank you very much, Ian Chappell and Ajit Gulabchand, for joining us in this fascinating conversation. Hopefully you would have drawn some leadership lessons there in the life story of Ian Chappell and Ajit Gulabchand. For tuning in to Leader Talk from me, Zakka Jacob, and the rest of the team, thanks for your time.